I wanted to dive into fundraising a little bit and spend a little bit of time talking about this. I'm gonna start with a broad question, and we're gonna dive down a couple different areas. But the broad question is your experience. You just wrapped up your experience, and this is the first time fundraising for Workspace. What'd you learn from the experience, or what worked or what didn't in your observation, just coming right off of being really focused on this?
I started out watching a lot of, what everybody does when they decide they're going to learn how to do this. You watch a bunch of videos from like Y Combinator and everybody else that kind of gives advice out there. And a lot of it, you're going to get a lot of advice about how to fundraise. And so, take this with a grain of salt. But one of the bits of advice some people say is that you should cold email everybody. And I think that might work for some people. We got 0 responses from cold emailing, 0. And maybe that's just the nature of our idea, where it's a little bit more niche than maybe, a general consumer or startup product, where maybe it's going to be a little bit different. But we ultimately just had to work our network, work through people that, we knew that trusted us. We had an advantage a little bit in the sense that, our mutual background at ThoughtWorks, where I don't know if everybody in the audience is going to know what ThoughtWorks is, but they're a good sized consultancy that tends to have a lot of people that when they leave, they become software leaders in the industry. They become directors of engineering, VPEs, so forth. And so and if you don't become one of those, you become we have a number of startup founders in our network. And so we were able to get some good advice from people that have been through it, hence the whole podcast series, I imagine, why you're doing this. But as well, I think it was really important for us to have people that we trusted that were also there that could give us the advice that we didn't want to hear. I remember one particular person saw our slide deck and said, literally, I wouldn't even give you a reference to somebody with this slide deck. It was so bad. Tough to hear, right? Very, very tough to hear, but was very, very valuable. I mean, it really, really honed our message, and it was precisely the thing we needed to hear to actually make our pitch a lot better.
I didn't find it that tough to hear. I always presumptively assume that whatever I'm doing is awful. So to hear someone reflect it back, I'm like, yes, it is terrible. Tell us more. Give us the worst. I love that, actually.
Hence why I'm always the optimistic one, and Brian always drags me back to reality. So
yeah, you were so wounded by it. I'm like, yeah, it's a terrible deck. This is awful.
So we work through our network, which, I don't know that that's actionable. I mean, like, build a network isn't something that you can just, okay, I built a network. Good. I'll just go do that. Like, that was pre-existing. So we had an advantage there. But as well, I mean, I think if you don't, like, I think it's really important that you get to know some other founders and understand, especially in the similar kind of, I'll call it, market you are. Like, if we talk to founders that were primarily doing B2C, I'm pretty sure most of the advice would be terrible. Because it just isn't the same kind of market. So talking to other, for our case, B2B SaaS startup founders was really, really valuable. And we got some decent advice, some really, really good advice. And really kind of picking which ones are relevant to you is actually kind of the art of this.
I feel like my follow-up question is how do you do that? Because I think I know one thing we've talked about beforehand was, everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth, and, everyone's got advice or they're researching advice for fundraising until they get into it. So, like, how do you screen the advice to figure out what's relevant to you and what's not?
So, I mentioned a little bit before, are they in a similar vertical? Have they been successful? How recent is it? One of the key things is you'll see a lot of advice out there that's based on how one might fundraise 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. And I think it's different in every year. And I think it's still the same way now. There's a lot of people that are funding companies right now. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I mean, I always kind of joke, like, the funding environment is so hot that even we got funded. It's a joke, actually. but at the same time, just understand that it's from that time, right? And be very careful about that kind of advice. That's pretty much all I have on that one. I think, Brian, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
To partially answer your question, I mean, I think after most of these calls, we'd always do a debrief, right? Aaron and I would hop on a call and say, like, how do you think that went? What worked well? What didn't work well? We always did a bit of an after action report. And I think we ended up tweaking the slide deck a little bit after each time, which, like, look, may not be the thing that you're supposed to. I think you hear different opinions about over indexing that. The thing that struck me when we were working together early on, Aaron, on the deck actually, is that I think your attitude in the deck was like, you had worked at ThoughtWorks for a long time, and your attitude towards slide deck sort of verges on contempt. You're like, whatever, we'll bang it out in an afternoon, it'll be fine. And I was like, no, we're going to spend several evenings just talking about, like, the tagline on the first slide. And you're like, this seems like too much time. And so I think that's maybe the difference in our approaches is, right. I really wanted to go pixel perfect on some of the stuff, and you really wanted to ship it. And I think both of those, that's a really valuable dynamic too. But but that, that was part of it, was just a continual iteration process. We also both come from a background where it was forced into us as part of, at least for me at ThoughtWorks, as part of my software education training, iterate, right? Don't bake a thing and then hope. Like, start with something dumb and then iterate your way on up from there, right? And I think that was as true for a fundraising as anything. After every conversation, we reflected, we tried to figure out what we thought was resonating or not, and then we moved on from there. I think I would say, we're both, we work in tech backgrounds. We have some connections into the VC side, but neither of us had raised before, and they weren't super deep, right? And so it was tough. I found it tough to understand, build a mental model of the motivations and sort of work through that, right? What other stuff that worked? We thought it was really valuable to have working software, especially at this stage. It was important that we be able to build the vision. The hard part actually was, I keep on saying the hard part. I suppose that means that a lot of them are hard, but building the vision, right? When I think back to my points of highest frustration in that journey, we have a vision in our heads. We know what we want to achieve. We know that the audience is out there because we've talked to all these people. How do we translate that vision into something that folks with this set of motivations will understand and vibe with and find compelling enough to sort of go with us on the journey? And again, I feel very fortunate that we found great partners eventually. But that wasn't every conversation, right? Not everyone would the worst conversation was we were talking to a VC that nominally specializes in SaaS, and we were running them through the system, and they were asking, "Isn't this HR's job to figure out who goes on what team?" And it was I don't know if you've ever helped staff a team in software, you'll understand that this is a thing that is vital to building software. Software is a team sport. Software requires the coordination and sort of the magical alchemy of people coming from an extraordinary sort of backgrounds and with a different set of skills to achieve meaningful things. And it's not HR's job to pull that together. It's the job of the people within the organization, on the team, leading the team, to sort of figure out how to make that magic work. And that's the magic that we want to try to capture and enhance, right? We want to try to work with people who want to get that right.